The story of Guinness. Friends, throughout history, certain things become symbols of entire nations. Chinese porcelain, English tea, French perfume. But it's far rarer for a single brand to become the symbol of a whole people. Today we're talking about one of those extraordinary cases. A name you almost certainly recognize, and a logo shaped like a harp. This is Guinness, the undisputed symbol of Ireland, found in every pub on earth, with roughly 10 million pints consumed every single day. But symbols don't appear by magic. Behind this one is a long, remarkable story, full of ambition, shrewd politics, family drama, and more than a little stubbornness. Humble beginnings. The earliest mention of a Richard Guinness dates to 1722 in a small village called Selbridge in County Kildare, Ireland. For years, the Guinness family claimed descent from ancient Irish aristocracy, the noble McGuinness clan. That story held up for centuries, until scientists recently compared the DNA of the two families. There was no connection whatsoever. The Guinnesses were ordinary people who had moved to the Dublin area sometime in the 1500s, changed their religion, and probably changed their name. The aristocratic origin story was a myth they built themselves, helped along by the right connections. Richard Guinness worked as a land steward for a Reverend Arthur Price in Selbridge, where he and his family lived for 30 years. The household had its own maltings, a small brewing operation, and Richard's son Arthur grew up learning the craft from childhood. When Arthur Guinness was in his late 20s, both his mother and his employer died, leaving the family without a home. They moved around before eventually settling in Leap, a village that had recently become fashionable after workers digging a canal discovered a mineral spring nearby. The well-off came from across Ireland to take the waters, and the Guinnesses seized the moment. In September 1756, Arthur rented a small brewery in Leixlip. It did well enough. 3 years later, he left his younger brother in charge and headed for Dublin to start something bigger. Dublin, 1759. Dublin, in the mid-18th century, was a city in flux, fast-growing, chaotic, and competitive. The population had tripled over the previous century. New commercial districts were springing up, and brewing was a popular trade. By some estimates, the city had 4,000 pubs and around 70 breweries. Arthur Guinness entered this world on the 31st of December, 1759. He was 34, single, ambitious, and deeply religious. On that New Year's Eve, he signed a lease on a brewery at St. James's Gate. The price was £45 a year, for a term of 9,000 years. Whatever the future holds, it seems there will always be room for a pint of Guinness. The brewery was a modest operation, run-down equipment, capable of producing maybe 40,000 liters a year. But Arthur had plans. 2 years later, he married Olivia Whitmore, the 19-year-old daughter of a Dublin merchant. Their age gap was considerable, but the match was strategically golden. Olivia brought money and, more importantly, connections to bankers, builders, politicians, and one Henry Grattan, the dominant figure in Dublin politics, who would later declare that the prosperity of Irish brewers and the health of Ireland were one and the same thing. Together they had 21 children. 10 survived infancy. The infant mortality of the era was brutal, and the Guinness family would experience more than their share of tragedy across the generations. Building the business. Arthur was not a man who played by the rules when the rules got in his way. One of the more entertaining episodes of his early years was a 20-year dispute with Dublin City over water rights. Water was essential for brewing. Arthur believed that since he was leasing the land, he owed nothing to the city for water usage. The city disagreed. At one point, inspectors discovered he had 2 illegal pipes supplying his brewery. They blocked them. He kept brewing. When city workers arrived to fill in the water source entirely, Arthur met them personally, standing in their way, holding a pickaxe, and informed them calmly that whatever they filled in, he would dig right back up. The standoff lasted 2 more years. Finally, in 1784, Arthur made an offer. He would pay £10 a year for the next 9,000 years. The city accepted, and both sides shook hands. By the 1790s, Arthur Guinness was one of the most successful brewers in Dublin. He estimated his brewery's worth at £10,000 and noted that he wouldn't sell it for £30,000. During this period, he also secured a significant political victory. Through his ally Henry Grattan, the excise tax on beer was abolished in 1795 and replaced with a higher tax on malt. This hit whiskey producers hard and made beer the more affordable drink for ordinary Irish people. Historians consider this one of the most important moments in the history of Irish brewing. Arthur Guinness died in January 1803 at the age of 78. He left behind 2 breweries, a mill, several properties, and around £15,000, a substantial fortune for the time. The next generation, Arthur Jr. His son, Arthur Guinness Jr., took over during a period of economic turbulence. War between England and France had disrupted trade, and the Irish pound was depreciating, but Jr. turned this to his advantage. English porter had nearly disappeared from Dublin's shelves, while exports of Irish porter to England were climbing. He expanded aggressively, appointed agents in Liverpool, Bristol, and London, and, crucially, in 1824, the first steamships began crossing the Irish Sea. The journey from Dublin to Liverpool dropped from a week to 14 hours. By 1814, annual sales had reached 80 million litres. Then Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, the English economy crashed, and sales halved within 5 years. Junior faced a choice: diversify or double down. He chose beer, scaled up production, and pushed exports harder. It worked. By the time the economic crisis had passed, only 2 Irish breweries were actively exporting to England. Guinness was one of them. Arthur Jr. lived to 87, outlasting almost all of his siblings. He left an estate of £180,000, and the bulk of it, along with control of the brewery, passed to his son, Benjamin Lee Guinness. Benjamin Lee and the birth of a national icon. Benjamin had spent most of his adult life in his father's shadow. He'd started working at the brewery at 16 and only took effective control in his 50s. But once he did, he transformed the business. He survived the Great Famine of the 1840s, a catastrophe that killed nearly 1 million people and drove another million out of Ireland. Paradoxically, the famine increased beer consumption. Agricultural wages rose sharply as the rural population collapsed, giving those who remained more spending power. A new market had opened up. Benjamin became Lord Mayor of Dublin, then a Member of Parliament. He funded the restoration of St. Patrick's Cathedral. He built the Dublin Exhibition Palace. Queen Victoria rewarded him with a baronetcy. In 1862, he made a decision that would last forever. He registered the harp as the company's trademark. The harp, ancient symbol of Ireland, instrument of the legendary High King Brian Boru, became the face of Guinness. It still is today. Benjamin died in London in May 1868, aged 69. His will was the largest ever recorded in Ireland at the time, £1 million. He divided it between his 2 eldest sons, Arthur and Edward, with a strict condition: the business must never be split. If either son walked away, his share would pass entirely to the other. Edward, the tycoon. Of the two brothers, it was Edward who truly built the Guinness empire. He effectively ran the business while Arthur enjoyed the profits, a situation Edward tolerated for a while, but not forever. In 1876, Arthur agreed to sell his share for £600,000, and Edward was left in sole control. He immediately began expanding. He bought land between the brewery and the River Liffey, gaining access to the port. Production doubled, then grew by 5% every year. By 1886, annual output exceeded 191 million liters. Guinness had become the largest brewery in Ireland, and then the largest in the world. That same year, Edward took the company public. It was one of the most sensational share offerings in British financial history. When the prospectus was published on a Thursday, by Saturday morning, the offices of the selling firm were under siege. Police struggled to hold back crowds of clerks, agents, and city officials. An outer door was broken down. Even the usually composed Times of London called the public response extraordinary. The shares were sold out in under an hour. Edward Guinness became one of the wealthiest men in the United Kingdom overnight. He used that wealth in complicated ways. On one hand, he was a genuine philanthropist. He established the Guinness Trust in 1889, donating £250,000 to build housing for the poorest residents of London and Dublin. He bought and demolished a notorious slum near St. Patrick's Cathedral, replacing it with decent housing. He funded a market for street traders who had previously worked in squalid conditions. On the other hand, the Guinness household spent lavishly. Edward's wife once spent £6,000 on a single ball in London, importing ice from Greenland for decorative columns. His brother's wife topped her the following month with a party costing £8,000. Edward received his own titles in succession: Baron, Viscount, and finally Earl of Ewes. He acquired a magnificent country estate in Suffolk. He assembled a celebrated art collection. When his doctor ordered him to retire in 1890, he handed control of the company to his brother-in-law, Reginald Guinness. He died in 1927, aged 89. His estate was valued at £13.5 million, the largest personal fortune in British history at that point. The advertising era, Rupert and the modern brand. Control passed to his son Rupert, the same Rupert who, as a small boy in Dublin's Phoenix Park, had received a whip across the face from his playmate Winston Churchill. They had shared a nanny when Churchill's father was in Dublin on business. Despite that early incident, the two remained friends for the rest of their lives. Rupert was 53 when he inherited the chairmanship, with almost no experience in the business. He had a reputation as an eccentric. He suffered from dyslexia, then unrecognized, and was simply thought to be a bit slow. In his youth, he had fought in the Boer War. Afterward, he had worked as his father's secretary. When he married, he turned down a life of luxury and spent 7 years living with his wife in a working-class tenement in Shoreditch, volunteering with the poor. His wife became one of the first women elected to the British Parliament. Rupert inherited the company just before the Great Depression struck. But two things saved Guinness. The United States soon repealed Prohibition, reopening the American market, and Guinness launched one of the most beloved advertising campaigns in history. They hired an illustrator named John Gilroy, who understood exactly what a tired working man wanted to see. His first poster showed a laborer carrying a steel girder on his shoulder, under the slogan, "Guinness gives you strength." Then came the famous zoo series: a toucan, a pelican, an ostrich, a sea lion, all interacting with zookeepers and pints of stout. The animals became iconic. When a 1936 poster showed an ostrich swallowing a zookeeper's pint glass, Guinness received thousands of letters from concerned customers, worried that the glass had gone in upside down and the ostrich couldn't get his drink. Gilroy worked with Guinness for 35 years. There was also the Message in a Bottle campaign. Guinness dropped sealed bottles into the Atlantic, Indian, and Pacific Oceans, and anyone who found one and wrote to the company received a small souvenir. Letters arrived from South America, the Philippines, India, the Arctic. Bottles are still being found today, roughly once or twice a year. It was called the longest-running advertising campaign in history. And then there was the book. Hugh Beaver, the company's managing director, got into an argument with a friend over which was the fastest game bird in Britain. They couldn't find the answer anywhere. Beaver realized that pubs everywhere must have similar unsettled arguments, and that a book of definitive records would be the perfect thing to settle them. He hired 2 researchers and set them to work. The result was the Guinness Book of Records. Published in 1955, a #1 bestseller within a year, and one of the best-selling books in history. The end of an era. Under Rupert, and then under his grandson Benjamin, Guinness expanded across Africa, Malaysia, and beyond. The company ventured into restaurants, real estate, and eventually spirits, acquiring whiskey producers and other alcohol companies. Sales grew so vast that the labels printed in a single year in the 1930s would nearly have wrapped around the entire earth. In 1986, Benjamin stepped down as chairman, the first time in the company's history that the role went to someone outside the family. By then, Guinness had become too large for any single family to manage. Its net assets had grown from £250 million to over £1 billion in just 4 years. Benjamin died in 1992 at the age of 55. In 1997, Guinness merged with Grand Metropolitan to form Diageo, now the largest alcoholic beverages company in the world. The Guinness family has had no operational role since. What remains? The Guinnesses are still counted among the wealthiest families in the world. Nearly 300 years after their first barrel of porter rolled out of a rundown brewery at St. James's Gate. In its first 100 years, 3 generations built a brewery, dominated the Irish market, and broke into England. The next generation entered the British aristocracy and the halls of Parliament. Together, they created a brand that outlasted empires, famines, 2 world wars, and the end of the family itself. And that remains, to this day, the unmistakable symbol of an entire nation.